The first time I noticed something was wrong wasn't when she shouted, or when she slammed a door, or when she stayed out late. It wasn't a big dramatic event, no fireworks or screaming. It happened in the silence. I came home from work that day like I had done for the past 5 years. The house was quiet, as usual. I thought I'd be greeted by the usual hum of daily life. Her making dinner, the TV on in the background, maybe even a brief, "How was your day?" But there was none of that. Karen wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't in the living room either. I checked the bedroom. Still no sign of her. At this point, I started wondering if I'd missed a note or a text saying she'd gone out. But no, there was nothing. I heard a faint sound coming from the back of the house. My heart sank a little, because it sounded like she was talking to someone, but I didn't hear another voice. That's when I found her, sitting in the dimly lit study, alone, staring out the window. When I walked in, I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there. Her expression wasn't what I expected. It was like I had walked in on a different woman, one who didn't recognize me or the life we had. She was looking out the window with an almost vacant expression, like she was seeing something beyond the horizon, something far away, something I couldn't reach. Then, after what felt like forever, she said it. "No touching today, Daniel." I froze. I had no idea what she meant by it. Was she mad at me? Was this some weird test I was supposed to pass? My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of it. She didn't look at me, didn't give me any clue as to why she'd said it. I stood there in the doorway, feeling completely off balance. "What?" I asked, almost too quietly. "I just can't right now," she mumbled, still staring out the window. It wasn't the answer I expected. It wasn't even an answer. It was as if she was speaking to herself, not to me. I didn't know how to respond. What could I say? I could have asked if she was okay, if something had happened, but I didn't. Something inside me, maybe my pride, maybe my fear, kept me silent. I turned and left her alone in the study, trying to convince myself that it was just a bad day, that things would be better tomorrow. But the next day wasn't any better. In fact, it was worse. Karen barely spoke to me. When she did, her words were clipped, as if she was speaking to someone she didn't know. When I tried to make plans, she'd say, "I'm busy," or "I'm not in the mood." I tried to hold on to the belief that maybe she was stressed, maybe work was overwhelming her. But I felt like I was chasing after something I couldn't reach. She became more distant, more elusive. Every time I tried to break through, she pulled further away. The third day felt like the breaking point. I tried to make her lunch in the morning, thinking it might bring back some of the normalcy we had before. But when I placed the sandwich in front of her, she didn't even look at it. Instead, she stood up, grabbed her coat, and said she was going out for a while. "Don't wait up," she said, the words chilling in their casual delivery. I didn't say anything in response. I just watched her leave. I never used to think about what life would be like without her. It was something that wasn't even on my radar. But that day, as I sat in the silence of our house, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What would I do if she didn't come back? What if she'd already made up her mind, and I was the one left behind? Later that night, as I waited for her to return, I found myself scrolling through my phone. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew that something wasn't right. That's when I saw it. A message from a number I didn't recognize. "Everything's ready for tonight. Can't wait to see you again." The room seemed to close in on me. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, betrayal, confusion. I didn't even know who it was from. When Karen came home, I was still sitting on the couch. She didn't seem surprised to see me awake, but she didn't ask why I was still up either. Instead, she said, "I'm going to bed." It was as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. The next morning, I woke up early. My stomach churned, and I could barely bring myself to look at her. It was like a knot had formed in my chest, and every time I thought about it, it tightened. I decided that I wasn't going to wait anymore. If she didn't want me, then I'd stop trying. If she wanted to be with someone else, then she could have that life, but it wouldn't be with me. So I waited until she was about to leave for work. When she came down the stairs, I didn't say a word. I simply stood up, walked past her, and opened the front door. She stopped and looked at me, confusion written all over her face. "You're leaving?" she asked. "Yes," I said, without looking back. "No more us." And just like that, she was gone. The silence after I left that morning was suffocating. I could still feel Karen's eyes on me as I walked past her, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The knot in my stomach tightened with every step I took, but I didn't look back. Not even once. When I got in my car, I didn't know where to go. My entire life felt like it had been ripped from under me, but I needed to get away, to clear my head. I didn't want to go home, but I didn't want to be at work either. So I drove. For hours. It's funny how a person can lose themselves in the simplest of actions. Driving. Watching the world pass by, no destination in mind, no one to talk to. I tried to shake off the anger and confusion that had settled in my chest, but it wouldn't go away. I was furious, not just at her, but at myself. How had I let things get so far? When I finally returned home, the house felt cold. It wasn't like when I'd left earlier. I thought it would be just an empty shell, a place I'd occupied for so long. But it was different now. It felt like it had been abandoned, like it was no longer ours. I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the empty space across from me. Her things were still here. Her clothes in the laundry room, her perfume still lingering in the air, her books on the shelf. But it all felt so alien now, like she had already moved on, and I was the one left behind to pick up the pieces. I had spent the past few days wondering if there was any way to fix things. If I could be the man she wanted me to be, if I could make her love me again. But now, after everything, I realized something. She wasn't the person I thought she was. She wasn't the woman who had promised to be with me forever, and that hurt more than anything else. Later that night, Karen returned home. She didn't say anything when she walked through the door. There was no apology, no explanation. She simply dropped her bag on the floor and walked into the kitchen. It was as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just shattered everything we had. I stayed on the couch, staring at the wall. Part of me wanted to confront her, demand answers, but another part of me knew it was pointless. The distance between us had become too great, and no amount of words would close the gap. When she finally sat next to me, I could feel the air shift. There was no affection, no tenderness, just a cold, indifferent silence. She looked at me for a moment, then turned her gaze away. "Why are you doing this, Karen?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. She just stared at the floor, her fingers playing with the hem of her sweater. "I don't know," she said softly, her voice distant. I don't know anymore, Daniel." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always believed that love could overcome anything. That if we tried hard enough, if we put in enough effort, we could work through anything. But now I wasn't so sure. "Is it someone else?" I asked, unable to stop myself. I needed to know. She didn't look at me, but her silence spoke volumes. That silence shattered whatever was left of my hope. "I'm sorry," she finally said, but it wasn't enough. The words didn't carry the weight they should have. I stood up and walked toward the door. I needed space. I needed time to think, to process everything. I wasn't sure what I expected when I came back, but I didn't expect this. As I reached for the door handle, I heard her voice again, softer this time. "Are you leaving again?" I paused for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe I'll come back. Maybe I won't." And with that, I left again. This time, I didn't have any plans, no destination. I just needed to be away from it all. The house, the marriage, her. It was all too much. Driving aimlessly, I tried to clear my mind, but the thoughts kept coming. The betrayal, the lies, the quiet goodbye that had been building for so long. It wasn't until hours later, when the sun had started to set, that I realized something. I had been giving my all to someone who had already checked out. I had been blind, too focused on trying to save something that couldn't be saved. And that's when I understood. It wasn't about trying to fix things anymore. It wasn't about begging her to love me or apologizing for my mistakes. It was about accepting that things were over, that this was the end. But what comes after the end? That was something I didn't know yet. The next few days were a blur, and honestly, I didn't want to face them. I'd wake up, get dressed, go through the motions, but the weight of everything sat on my chest like a stone. Karen didn't try to stop me when I left that night, didn't even bother to text or call. It was like she had already moved on. And as hard as it was to admit, I had too. Or at least, I was trying to. But something about that empty house kept pulling me back. Every night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echoes of her voice in my mind. "No touching today, Daniel," she had said, her words still cutting through me. But it was more than just the words. It was the absence of her warmth, of her presence, that gnawed at me. It wasn't the first time she'd pushed me away, but it was the first time I realized she didn't want me at all. I thought about her message to me on that day, how casually she'd said it. like she had already made her peace with the idea that things between us were done. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how far back it went. This distance between us. It didn't start with a fight or a specific incident. It started slowly, like the fading of a once bright light. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I hadn't seen the signs. Or maybe I had just ignored them. There was something else, though. Something deeper. I hadn't fully processed it yet, but as I walked around the house trying to avoid facing the obvious, I found myself looking at her things, her clothes, her books, and the little trinkets that made our house feel like home. The images of her in my mind, the memories of her laughter, and the way she'd look at me when we were alone, felt like a lie. I had lost her long before I knew it, and she was already somewhere else, physically and emotionally. It wasn't until a week later, after several sleepless nights and countless attempts to distract myself, that I decided I had to face this. I needed to know the truth. I needed to hear it from her. I wasn't going to sit here in this limbo anymore, pretending things were fine when everything was falling apart. I showed up at the house on a Saturday morning. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I was determined to find out what had really happened. The door was unlocked, which was strange. She always locked it when she left, even if she was just stepping out for a moment. I hesitated for a moment before walking in. The house was quiet, too quiet. The living room was empty. The kitchen, usually full of the smells of something cooking, was silent. It felt like a ghost house. I called her name softly, almost as if I was afraid of disturbing the stillness, but she didn't respond. So, I walked through the house, past the pictures of us, past the couch where we used to sit and talk for hours. And then, in the bedroom, I found her, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at something on her phone. She didn't hear me come in. She didn't even look up when I stood there in the doorway. It was strange, seeing her like that. So distant. She was still wearing her robe, her hair a bit messy as if she hadn't bothered to get ready for the day. For a moment, I wondered if she even remembered who I was. The woman who had once held me in her arms and told me she loved me. But now, she didn't even look at me. Finally, she turned her head slightly, enough to acknowledge that I was there. But her expression, her eyes, were empty. There was no recognition in them, no warmth. Just a coldness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said, her voice flat, almost like she had been expecting it. I didn't know what to say. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. "Why did you leave?" The question came out before I could stop it. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at her phone, scrolling through something with a blank expression. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't know if I ever really loved you the way I said I did." That hit me harder than anything she could have said. For years, I had believed that we were good, that we had something solid. But now, standing here, I realized it was all a lie. Everything we had built, every plan, every dream, had been built on something that wasn't real. "You're with someone else, aren't you?" I asked, my voice shaking, though I wasn't sure if it was from anger or heartbreak. For a long time, she didn't answer. She didn't even look up. The silence between us was thick, unbearable. But then she spoke, her voice quieter now, almost sad. "Yes." That was all. One word. A single word that broke everything I thought I knew about her. About us. She was seeing someone else, and I had been too blind to see it. Or maybe I just didn't want to. "I'm sorry," she added softly, but the apology was empty. It didn't matter anymore. It wasn't enough. Nothing could fix this. I turned and walked away. This time, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. There was no fighting for something that had already ended, no going back to a life I thought was mine. I left the house, knowing that once you've been replaced in someone's heart, there's no place for you anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure who I was anymore either. I didn't go far when I left that day. I wandered aimlessly, my mind racing, trying to grasp the gravity of what I had just learned. It was the kind of knowledge that hits you like a truck, yet it doesn't make any sound when it hits. I couldn't wrap my head around how everything had changed so suddenly. Karen had been my anchor, my constant. Now, she wasn't even a shadow of the woman I knew. The woman I thought I knew. I spent the rest of that afternoon driving around the city, making loops, going nowhere in particular. The streets felt unfamiliar, even though I'd driven them hundreds of times before. It was as if I had become a stranger in my own life. I couldn't stop thinking about the words she'd said. "I don't know if I ever really loved you the way I said I did." I had tried to convince myself that I had seen the signs. I had thought that her distance, the long hours at work, the subtle shifts in her behavior. Those were just passing phases. But they weren't. They were the cracks that slowly began to widen until everything came crashing down. And I had never seen it coming. The anger I felt wasn't just for her. It was for myself, too. How had I been so blind? How had I allowed myself to get so comfortable that I missed the signs of her pulling away? I had spent years trying to be the good husband, the understanding one. I had always put her needs before mine. But in the end, it wasn't enough. She had checked out long ago, and I hadn't even noticed. But now, there was no going back. I couldn't unhear what she had told me. I couldn't unsee the emptiness in her eyes when she told me she didn't love me anymore. I stopped the car at a park, still unsure of what I was trying to do. The place was quiet, just like everything else in my life had become. I stepped out and walked to the edge of the small pond, my reflection distorted in the water. I had been a fool. I had let my love for her blind me to everything else. As I stood there, trying to figure out what to do next, my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look at it, didn't want to deal with anything or anyone. But I checked anyway, and what I saw stopped my heart. It was a message from Karen. I'm sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you. That was it. Nothing more, just a few words. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. She was sorry, but it didn't change anything. The damage was done. I could feel the anger and sadness building inside me, swirling into a storm. I wanted to call her, to scream at her, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. I couldn't. It was too late for explanations. She had made her choice, and I had to live with it. I put my phone back in my pocket and took a deep breath. The next chapter of my life was waiting for me, whether I was ready for it or not. As I walked back to my car, I realized something else. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her explanations. What I needed was to find myself again, to rebuild my life from the pieces she had left behind. For too long, I had been defined by her. My worth had been tied to her, to our relationship, to the idea of us. But now that was gone, and I needed to figure out who I was without her. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was going to be long and painful, but it was a road I had to walk on my own. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a purpose again. I wasn't just going to sit around and wait for the pain to fade. I was going to move forward, even if it meant facing a future I hadn't planned for. When I got back home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood at the door for a moment, looking at the house. It felt like a different world now, one that no longer belonged to me. The person who had once walked through that door, eager to share his day with his wife, didn't exist anymore. That version of me had been erased, wiped out by the reality of what had happened. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The house was still as silent as it had been when I left, and I realized that this silence would be my new companion. The silence of an empty marriage, the silence of a life falling apart. But it was a silence I would learn to live with. As I walked through the house, I came across the kitchen, where Karen and I had spent countless evenings cooking together, laughing, sharing moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else. I stopped in the doorway and stared at the empty counter, the untouched cups of coffee, the half-finished plates of food that were left behind when things had changed. I wasn't sure what came next. I wasn't sure how to move on, but I knew I had to. And the first step was accepting the reality of what had happened. The life I thought I had wasn't mine anymore. The person I thought I knew was gone. And now, it was time to find my own way forward. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast. But for the first time in a long time, I had no choice but to walk it. And I was ready. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and a strange sort of numbness. I spent the first few nights alone, just staring at the ceiling, asking myself how we had gotten here. How had I ended up in this place of broken promises, with nothing but the remains of a life I thought I knew? The house felt suffocating, every creak and groan in the walls serving as a reminder that I wasn't the person I used to be. The life I had built was unraveling in ways I hadn't expected, and with it, I had to face a brutal truth. I had no idea who I was without her. Karen's absence hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't escape it. The sound of the door closing when she left that last time, the silence that followed her departure, all replayed in my mind, over and over. Every day, I told myself I would move on, that I would find some kind of closure. But the reality was far messier than that. Closure wasn't something you could just wish into existence. It was earned, and in this case, it would take time. I kept telling myself I would be fine. that I could survive this, that I would rebuild myself, piece by piece. But every time I reached for that sense of strength, it felt like it was just out of reach, like it was someone else's life, not mine. Every time I saw something that reminded me of her, her coffee mug, the books we had read together, even the notes we used to leave each other, I felt this weight in my chest. It wasn't just sadness. It was a deep sense of loss, a loss of myself in her world. 2 weeks passed before I even considered picking up the phone to call her. I had no idea what I would say. But one night, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cold mug in front of me, I realized I couldn't keep avoiding it. I needed answers, and no amount of time alone was going to give them to me. So I called. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello. Her voice was distant, almost guarded. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know if I was ready to hear her side of things, or if I just needed closure, or maybe I just needed to feel like I had some control over this mess. Karen, I said, my voice shaky. We need to talk. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't say anything. Part of me was expecting her to hang up, to shut me out completely. But she didn't. Are you still at the house? I asked, trying to sound calm, trying to hide the knot in my throat. I wasn't ready to hear what I knew was coming, but I had to ask. I'm not there right now, she replied, her voice tight. I'm staying at a friend's place for a while. The words stung more than I expected. She had already moved on, physically, at least. The idea that she was spending time with someone else, somewhere else, didn't sit well with me. But I didn't let it show. I need to understand why, Karen. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you try to work this out? Her response was a sigh, heavy with exhaustion. I didn't know how, she said quietly. I didn't know how to tell you that I had been unhappy for so long. I was afraid of what you would think, what you would feel. I didn't want to hurt you. I let the words sink in. So you just left? Without saying anything? I didn't leave because I wanted to hurt you, she answered quickly. I left because I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living a lie. I was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. What was I supposed to say to that? What do we do now? I finally asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. I wasn't asking for her to come back. I wasn't asking for anything from her, but in that moment, I realized I had no idea how to move forward. I had no plan. I had no idea what life without her was supposed to look like. I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. I wish I could tell you that everything would be okay, but I can't. I don't know what comes next for us. There it was. The brutal truth. She didn't know, and neither did I. We talked for a few more minutes, but there wasn't much left to say. We were two people who had once shared a life, but now we were strangers, trying to find our way back to something that wasn't even there anymore. It wasn't like the movies, where everything is wrapped up in a neat little bow. It was messy, painful, and uncertain. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling more lost than I had in weeks. I had hoped that talking to her would give me some kind of clarity, but all it did was remind me of how far apart we had drifted. She was still the woman I had loved, but she was also a person I didn't recognize anymore. And I was starting to realize that maybe I wasn't the person she had loved either. That night, I went to bed early. I didn't want to spend another second trying to figure out what went wrong, trying to piece together the fragments of something that had already fallen apart. For once, I let myself feel everything. The anger, the sadness, the frustration, and I let it wash over me. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of resolve. I didn't have all the answers, and I still had no idea what my future would look like. But I knew one thing. I had to keep moving forward. Even if that meant walking away from everything I thought I knew. Even if that meant learning to live without her. I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, and stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. It was time to start fresh, even if I didn't know how. The only way out was through, and I was ready to walk that road, whatever it looked like. The days that followed felt like a constant battle between staying in the past and trying to look toward the future. Every time I woke up, it was a fight to pull myself out of the fog that Karen had left behind. I didn't want to stay stuck in this emotional rut, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling of her absence. The house, which had once felt like a home, now felt like a prison, an empty shell that echoed with memories of a life that no longer existed. I spent most of my time outside of the house, trying to avoid the suffocating reality of my situation. I went to the gym, walked around the city, even started picking up old hobbies that I had abandoned long ago. But no matter where I went or what I did, there were always reminders of her, little things that kept drawing me back. The grocery store we used to visit on weekends, the old cafe where we had our first date, even the movie rentals we used to pick out on Friday nights. Everything was tied to her, and I couldn't escape it. One evening, as I was sitting on my couch, trying to lose myself in a book, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from Karen, and for a second, my heart skipped. I hadn't heard from her in a few days, and I didn't know what to expect. She had sent me a simple message. "I saw something today. It made me think of you." That was it. I stared at the text for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Was this a sign she wanted to talk? Was she reaching out, trying to bridge the gap between us? Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to tell her that I missed her, that I was still angry but wanted to understand. But then another part of me, the part that had been burned so badly, told me to stay quiet, to let things be. But curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't just leave it hanging. I typed a quick reply. "What did you see?" Her response came almost instantly. "I saw an old photograph of us. You had that ridiculous smile, and I remember how happy we were back then. It made me realize how much I missed the way things used to be." I felt a coldness spread through me. That smile she was talking about. I knew exactly which one she meant. It was the one I used to give when I was with her. The one that felt genuine, unburdened. The one that seemed to be a part of everything we had built together. But now, reading her words, I realized how different everything had become. She wasn't talking about the present. She was talking about the past, and that's all she had left of us. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to say. I wanted to be angry, to shout, to demand answers. But the truth was, I didn't know if I had the energy for that anymore. I had given everything I had to this relationship, and now I was sitting here, alone, talking about memories that didn't seem to matter to her anymore. Instead, I typed, "Yeah, I remember that day. We were happy, weren't we?" She didn't respond right away. In the silence that followed, I could almost hear the weight of the conversation hanging between us, the unsaid words that had been left unspoken for so long. Then, finally, she replied, "I still love you, Daniel. I don't know what to do with that anymore." The message hit me like a punch to the gut. She still loved me, but she didn't know how to make it work. It was like a cruel paradox. She loved me, but we were no longer the people we used to be. I didn't know how to process it. How could she love me if she had already walked away? My hands shook as I held the phone, my thoughts racing. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't know what words could fix this. What words could bring back the version of us that no longer existed? I sat there, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, unable to make sense of what was happening. It felt like she was reaching out, but only enough to keep me in her orbit. She wasn't asking for us to fix it. She was just holding on to the last thread of what we once had. I wasn't sure if that was more painful than her total absence, but it felt like it might be. I decided to put the phone down. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep waiting for something that wasn't coming. I had to move on. For my own sake, for my own sanity, I had to let go. But the problem was, I wasn't sure how to. I spent the next few days avoiding her messages, telling myself that I was doing the right thing. I told myself that I didn't need her validation, that I didn't need to keep going back to her for answers. But there was a part of me, a small part, that wanted to know if there was still something left between us. If there was a way to fix what had been broken. I tried to get back to my routine, to focus on something else. But everywhere I went, every moment I spent alone, her words echoed in my mind. "I still love you." The weight of those words felt like it was crushing me. She still loved me, but she was gone. And now, I was left here, trying to piece together a life that no longer had her in it. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be. But I had to try. I had to try to move forward, even if it meant walking into the unknown without any guarantees. Because at the end of the day, the only thing I had left was the person I would become. And I had to find him. The weeks that followed felt like a never-ending cycle of half-formed thoughts and attempts to rebuild my life. I tried to pretend like everything was fine, like I could go back to my old routine and forget about the person who had been the center of my world for so long. But every time I got close to feeling normal, something would remind me of her. Her laughter, the way she smiled when she saw me after a long day, the small touches, the late-night conversations. It all seemed like a cruel joke now, a life I was no longer a part of. I tried to distract myself. I threw myself into work, started going out with friends more often, even made an effort to reconnect with people I hadn't spoken to in years. But every time I found a moment of peace, it would slip away, and I'd be back to thinking about Karen and what had gone wrong. I couldn't stop wondering if I had done something to push her away, or if this was all just inevitable. One evening, a few weeks after we'd last spoken, I was out at a bar with some friends, trying to forget everything. I wasn't drinking too much, just enough to take the edge off. I wasn't looking for anything, but I found myself distracted by a couple sitting at the table next to mine. They were laughing, touching each other like they had all the time in the world. They looked so comfortable, so at ease with each other. It made something inside me stir, a feeling I couldn't quite place. Was it jealousy? Longing? Maybe both. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept drifting back to them. Something about their connection, the way they shared that quiet intimacy, made me realize just how much I missed it. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just grieving Karen. I wasn't just angry at her for leaving. I was grieving the life I thought I had, the connection I thought was unbreakable. But what was left now? A hollow version of that life, a memory of something that had been ripped away. I excused myself from my friends and stepped outside for some air. The night was cool, the kind of air that fills your lungs and makes you feel alive. But I didn't feel alive. I felt numb, like I was stuck in some kind of emotional purgatory where nothing made sense anymore. I didn't know how to move forward, but I couldn't keep holding on to the past either. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I had ignored her messages for days, maybe even weeks, but something about the way the screen lit up made me pause. It was from Karen. "I miss you," it said. Nothing else. Just those 3 words. I stood there, staring at the message, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to block her number and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had never really let go, wanted to respond. I wanted to know why, after all this time, she was reaching out. What did she want from me now? I took a deep breath and started typing. "I miss you too. But why now?" My fingers hovered over the send button, my heart racing. Was I making a mistake? Was this just another false hope, another attempt to cling to something that wasn't there anymore? But before I could second-guess myself, I hit send. The message didn't go unnoticed. She replied almost immediately. "I don't know," she said. "I guess I can't stop thinking about everything we had. I miss the way things used to be." I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like I was caught in a whirlwind. Her words weren't a confession, not really, but they were a crack in the door, a sliver of light in the darkness. Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the street, to end this once and for all. But another part of me, the part that had always been waiting for her to come back, wanted to ask her why she left in the first place. I wanted answers, closure, something to make sense of all the chaos. But I couldn't force her to give me that. "Do you think we could ever fix this?" I typed, my hands trembling as I asked the question I had been afraid to voice for so long. There was a long pause before she responded. I stood there, staring at the phone, feeling every second stretch longer than the last. Finally, her reply came through. "I don't know. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry for everything." And with that, the conversation ended. No resolution. No answers. Just an apology that felt like a bandage on a wound that wouldn't heal. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, reading and rereading her words, trying to make sense of it all. I realized something that night. She wasn't the one who needed to fix things. I was. I had to stop waiting for her to come back, for her to suddenly make everything right. I had to stop living in the past, hoping for a future that would never come. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally looked up, I realized that the world hadn't stopped moving. People were still walking by, cars were still driving down the street, and I was still here, breathing, living, trying to figure out how to move forward. The truth was, I didn't know how to, but I knew I had to try. I couldn't let this define me. I couldn't let this one chapter of my life be the end of the story. I deleted her message, put my phone back in my pocket, and started walking. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but I wasn't going to wait for her anymore. I wasn't going to sit around hoping she would come back to fix what was broken. I had to fix it myself. And that, in itself, was the hardest part. It's strange how things change when you stop waiting for them to. The weight I had been carrying, this constant pull towards something that was already lost, suddenly felt lighter. When I finally stopped looking backward, something inside me shifted. I wasn't sure when it happened, but little by little, I started to feel like myself again. The first few days after I deleted Karen's message felt like a small victory. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There wasn't a grand epiphany. But it was the first step I had taken toward moving on, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. I started doing things that I enjoyed, things I hadn't done in what felt like forever. I rediscovered my love for painting, the way I used to lose myself in the brushstrokes, the way the colors would come together and create something beautiful. I went back to the gym, not to escape my feelings, but to feel strong again, to reclaim the confidence I had let slip away. One day, a few months after I had begun to rebuild my life, I was walking down the street, my mind distracted by the simple things, an old song playing on the radio, the sound of children laughing in the park, the warmth of the sun on my face. It was a perfect day, and I hadn't felt that kind of peace in so long. As I passed a small cafe, I spotted a familiar face sitting at one of the tables, reading a book. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but as I got closer, I realized it was Rachel, an old friend from college I hadn't seen in years. Her face lit up when she saw me, and I felt a rush of warmth flood over me. "Daniel, it's been forever," she said, standing up and giving me a hug. We sat down together, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of lightness that had been missing. We talked about everything: life, work, old friends, the things that mattered. And as we laughed and caught up, I realized something. I wasn't defined by what had happened with Karen. I wasn't defined by the mistakes I had made or the pain I had gone through. I was Daniel, and I was still capable of finding joy, of building something new. Rachel and I started seeing more of each other after that day. It wasn't anything I had planned, and it wasn't some whirlwind romance. It was slow, steady, and real. We shared simple moments, walking through the park, grabbing coffee, talking about our hopes and dreams. And for the first time in a long while, I realized that love wasn't something to chase. It was something that would come when the time was right. Months passed, and I found myself waking up with a sense of excitement, not for a future with someone else, but for the future I was building for myself. I learned that it was okay to be alone, that it was okay to be unsure, and that sometimes the most important step is just taking that first one, no matter how small it seems. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset, I finally understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Life doesn't stop just because something falls apart. You don't wait for it to come back together. You pick up the pieces, and you move forward. You make a new life with the lessons you've learned, with the strength you never knew you had. And as the stars began to fill the sky, I smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of something beautiful. I didn't need Karen's apology. I didn't need her love. I had my own, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was finally ready to walk it.